Welcome into WLOY, Loyola Radio, streaming online at WLOY.org and Campus TV channel 111.1. You're listening to After the Whistle, Loyola's premier sports talk radio show, airing every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. and every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. Welcome into another Friday edition of the show. I'm your host today, Jeffrey Bazzi, alongside my co-host, Jimmy Cody. Jimmy, how is everything?
Everything is all right. Actually, I forgot to bring this up before the show. Huge news for you and your baseball team, the Philadelphia Phillies. Rhys Hoskins suffering that injury. How are you?
Yeah, it's tough news to hear. Obviously, the way that it happened was unfortunate. It was a ground ball and he took a few missteps, but it's obviously a devastating blow, not just to Hoskins, because it's an injury that's going to keep him out for the whole year, and he was going to be into his contract year this year. But for the Phillies, too, you definitely lose a lot of power in the lineup with Hoskins out. And I know that he has a lot of peaks and valleys throughout the year. I mean, there could be 2 weeks where he looks like one of the best hitters in the game, but there's also times where he can't put the bat in the ball. But it's
And
definitely gonna be a big loss.
and his fielding sometimes is subpar at times, I'd
Yeah.
say. But the way he played in the playoffs last year, I mean, it's a loss because if he catches fire, especially with his power, I mean, he is one of the most deadly possible hitters in the league
Right.
when he's on fire.
Especially when you mix in his power with other power hitters in the lineup, such as Kyle Schwarber and others.
It also sucks because the Phillies are not going to have Bryce Harper for what, half the season. That's the
Yeah,
expectation.
there was some optimism that he could come back sooner, but the expectation is probably around half the year.
Yeah, and now Ranger Suarez also was dealing with some arm injuries as well. So you guys are beaten up pretty bad in spring training.
Yeah, and with opening day now 6 days away, it's definitely not the way that the Phillies wanted to go into the season, but
No, I mean the Yankees are the same
yeah,
thing. Harrison Bader's hurt. We have Carlos Rodon, who was supposed to be the big free agent signing of the offseason, now hurt as well. And that's just a bad way to start things. But the Yankees have by far the worst injury related situation I've ever seen. Maybe only the Mets can take that title, and maybe like the Baltimore Ravens, because I feel like they're always hurt as well. But at the same time, the Yankees, I feel like, don't change anything. At least when Steve Cohen came in, he's like, all right, we got to focus on this. I don't know what the Yankees do about this, because it seems like every pitcher we get is hurt. Frankie Montas, Carlos Rodon, Sonny Gray when he came over hurt. I mean,
Luis
there's
Severino
Luis
here and
Severino.
there.
Yeah, he has definitely had his issues with injuries. Domingo Herman last year as well. I mean, I do not know what it is when it comes to the injuries with this team, but it is bad. Um, but I mean, the Phillies are going through the same thing, so there's really no room for us to complain, as are other teams, such as the Astros with Jose Altuve and the Mets with Edwin Diaz and Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a bad, unfortunate sequence of events.
Yeah, certainly. All right, let's get into some March Madness talk, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it. We have a wild night to recap, and we'll have some guests on later in the show. We'll be diving into more of it. But for now, I mean, there were two games that stood out last night, and the other two were notable matchups as well. It's just the Arkansas UConn game was pretty one-sided for the most part. UConn blowing out Arkansas 88-65. And then we had an entertaining game between FAU and Tennessee, with FAU once again shocking the world, winning 62-55. But the two games that are definitely most notable are the Michigan State Kansas State game, and then the late game last night, the Gonzaga UCLA showdown. So I don't know where you want to start first.
Let's start with Michigan
We'll
State.
start with Michigan State and Kansas State. They were facing off in the Sweet 16 at Madison Square Garden in New York. And talk about back and forth. This was a great back and forth battle, especially down the stretch. And we finally, Jimmy, got our first overtime game of March Madness. It only took us to the second weekend to get one, but we did get one. And I just thought the back and forth between Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson going up against the likes of AJ Hogard and others of Michigan State, it was just a back and forth battle. And I felt like down the stretch, it almost felt like whatever team got a stop is probably going to win the game.
Yeah.
And I thought for Michigan State, I thought they were going to take it in overtime. I just felt like, I don't know, they had kind of an edge at the time, but they had a few bad breaks go their way, especially that one block 3-pointer that barely hit the fingertip. That was kind of a bad break.
There was two plays that I really thought kind of turned the energy for MSU in overtime. And the first one I thought was the play in which Marquise Noel was looking over at the sideline, and then he passed the ball up for the lob. I mean, that was a kind of a momentum killing play just because of Michigan State was so caught like by surprise by that play. And then after that, I felt like that ended up giving Kansas State the lead, but then Michigan State, because they were behind, then had more pressure on the defensive end. You see them go for that block. And you're right, Jeffrey, that block was a killer because it looks like, okay, air ball, they're getting the ball back. And no, it's Kansas State ball. And that's such a complete game changer for Michigan State. And honestly, I didn't think that Michigan State played their best game by any means. I didn't think their defense was up to where it usually is, and it has been throughout this tournament. And at the same time, for Kansas State, they just kind of did what they always do, which is rely on their two best players, and it gets them another win, and they're going to the Elite Eight.
And the thing about Kansas State relying on their two best players, we're talking about Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson. Marquise Noel, I thought early on was taking some really bad shots early on. He was taking some really deep 3-pointers and kind of just chucking them up. But as time went on, you saw him rack up the assists, and he had 19 assists. I mean, he almost had more assists than he did points, and he had 20 points.
Yeah, 19
That's
assists is amazing.
I mean, he's getting other guys involved, and I think there's other contributions that end up being huge from Tomlin and Carter and Hassan and Masood. They all had double-figure points. So to have 6 guys in double figures, I mean, that's going to go a long way for anyone to win in this tournament. But yeah, I think Michigan State definitely was in the game the whole way. I mean, they kind of had it. I thought they kind of had the upper half, especially in the second half. I thought they kind of rebounded from the first half and kind of took control, but Kansas State was just right there. And like you said, they kind of just rode the duo of Noel and Johnson, and that's kind of what they've been doing all year, like you said. So their season continues. They were riding along the Elite Eight.
And, we always talk about the difference. Kansas State, because they had that point guard experience with Marquise Noel, they didn't really turn the ball over and give themselves, give themselves extra possessions of defense and extra possessions for MSU to make shots. And because I thought the MSU offense was honestly fine. Like, I didn't think the offense was really the reason that they lost. Like, if you look at their other games, I just attribute it to solely their defense not being where it was in some of the other games. Like, especially if you look at the Marquette game. I thought their defense intensity was way better in that game. I thought they had a much stronger defensive performance. And I thought the same thing against USC as well, which I didn't see with them here. And for Michigan State too, I will say I'd never thought this team was like Elite Eight good. Like, watching them throughout the Big Ten regular season, obviously as somebody who like roots for Rutgers, I've paid attention to them. I saw them play against Rutgers twice, and I saw like a mixed bag. I was like, all right, they have some good moments, but never at any point did I look at this team and be like, okay, yeah, this is a Sweet 16 or Elite Eight team. So if I'm being honest, I feel like they kind of overachieved.
A little bit. Yeah, I mean, they came into the tournament as a 7 seed, and like you said, they've had good moments all year, but they've also had bad moments where they don't really look like a tournament team. But I think when they put it together, they can definitely beat anyone, as you saw them beat Marquette in the second round. But I think the killer play for Michigan State was the last play of the game when they were down 3. They didn't even get a shot off.
Oh, yeah, that was a terrible possession.
We talk about how good their offense was, and their offense was phenomenal. It's just, I just thought they hesitated a little bit too much.
Oh, no, that possession was a complete nightmare. I'm just talking about the game as a whole.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously. And if
the
you
game
talk about
as a
that,
whole, they were great. I mean, 93 points, and you still lose. I mean, 93 points is nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, it's just giving up 98.
It's just what more can you want? Yeah.
Yeah, and 19 assists is really tough. I mean, that is a really good game from a floor general. I mean, there's not much more that you can expect out of a point guard. Reasonably. I mean, 19 assists is about as high as you could expect ever out of any point guard. That's an outstanding game.
Yeah. Marquise Noel is definitely making a name for himself. I feel like these last 2 rounds, he's kind of exploded. We know what kind of player he is, but I think he's really putting himself on the map right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see how far they go. They will play FAU tomorrow. Or, yeah, it is tomorrow in the Elite Eight. So one of those teams is going to the Final Four.
Yeah, so Kansas State and FAU will be facing off. Let's talk about that FAU game really quickly. I know you hit on it before, and we said that, FAU pulled it out and whatnot, but I think this was a game that a lot of people, particularly if you had been following this tournament and you saw the game that Tennessee just played, you would have thought Tennessee would probably be running FAU out of the gym because they just played a close game with Fairleigh Dickinson. However, if you have been following college basketball all year, you knew that Florida Atlantic was ranked most of the year. And honestly, they were kind of underseeded, in my opinion.
Yeah, 9 seed, they were a little underseeded, I think, too. And coming into the game, they definitely had a tough battle against Fairleigh Dickinson, which they were able to pull away. And I completely agree with you about Tennessee, Jimmy. Coming off that Duke win when they looked really good from start to finish, they kind of shocked a lot of people just because everyone picked Duke for the most part to not only win that game, but kind of go far in the tournament. And Tennessee kind of just silenced the haters in a way. But the Tennessee offense last night, and I'm not sure if it was the offense just being stuck in neutral or you credit FAU's defense, but I mean, one or the other. Tennessee just couldn't hit a lot of shots. I mean, they didn't have a player that scored over 10 points.
No, it
They
was
had two players that scored 10 each, but that was it. And when you have Vescovi only have 9 points, and he's kind of the main guy right now on offense with Ziegler injured, I mean, it's not going to cut it.
no, absolutely, it's not going to cut it. 55 points would never cut it in a game like this. You got to at least put up 60. And listen, Tennessee was more of a defensive team, and I still think that they played pretty good defense. 62 points is nothing to be ashamed of. The problem is for Tennessee, they were so bad on offense. I mean, look at that. They shot 33% from the field. That's just horrible. Like you're making one of every three shots. There's no way you're going to be able to keep up with that pace. And at the same time, too, they're not a very good 3-point shooting team. They didn't get to the line as much as FAU did. And at the same time, too, when you're just not making shots to go along with some of those other things, you're never going to have the offensive performance that you have when you're already missing your best player. So they just had so many things kind of working against them, and they weren't able to ever, kind of get on track with their offense. And credit to FAU. It was kind of a game that both sides had to grind out. And at the end of the day, they found a way to win, despite the fact that Tennessee is still a pretty strong defensive team. I mean, FAU really had to dig in their heels on offense, and they still managed to get a win.
Yeah, and digging the heels in an offense is a perfect way to describe it because FAU was down at half by 5, and they only had 22 points, but to come out and put up 40 in the second half, they kind of had this resurgence. And yeah, they just showed resiliency. I mean, I think a lot of people in that Fairleigh Dickinson FAU game were kind of just riding the whole FDU story, which is definitely rightfully so. I mean, a 16 seed beating a 1 is something that's rarely happened in this tournament. It's only happened twice. And I think a lot of people were not really paying too much attention to FAU. But like you said, they've been ranked all year. They've been kind of just cruising along. They've won a lot of games. They know how to win games. So I think for them to come out and beat a team like Tennessee, I mean, that's definitely very impressive. And now they're sniffing the Final Four.
Yeah, all right. I mean, I totally agree with that. But let's talk about the main course of the night. I think that's got to be
the entree,
the Gonzaga UCLA game. I mean, this is what we were waiting for. This is what March Madness is all about. And honestly, I think this was probably the biggest firepower matchup we've had so far. We had Drew Timme going up against Tiger Campbell and Jaime Jaquez, and these teams we've seen them play not too long ago, and of course, it involves some of the same players.
Right. Back in 2021, they met in the Final Four when Gonzaga was undefeated, the number 1 overall seed, in UCLA, a shocking 11 seed going all the way to the Final Four. But this time around, Gonzaga was a 3 seed, UCLA was a 2 seed. And I don't know, this game was kind of a pick 'em coming in. You heard a lot of people take the Zags just because they've been kind of flying under the radar. They still have Drew Timme, a great cast around them. But you have UCLA on the other side with the dynamic duo of Tiger Campbell and Jaime Jaquez Jr., like you said, and they have a strong supporting cast as well. But for the game itself, I mean, this was an absolute roller coaster because I'm watching the first half, Jimmy. UCLA is coming out and they're hitting a ton of shots. They hang 46 on the Zags in the first half, and they're up 13. They're in cruise control. Everyone's feeling good. And out of nowhere in the second half, Gonzaga finds a way to, I thought, get in the paint a lot. A lot of their points in the second half during the comeback, they were kind of just chipping away slowly, and they were getting inside. And credit to Drew Timme for a lot of that. He had 36 points. I mean, an absolute monster game from him. And actually, he scored, I believe, the first 13 of Gonzaga's 15 points in the game. So right away, he was coming out, setting the tone, establishing himself down low. And then, I mean, we didn't even bring up the run at the end of the game that UCLA was on. They were
to
down,
get themselves back,
I believe, 9. It could have been 10. I don't really remember, but I think it was 9. They were down 9 with 1:05 left. They come back. They go on a 10-1 run in 41 seconds, and they go up 1 after, I forget his name, so forgive me for not knowing his name, but one of the lefties on UCLA, he hit a 3. I believe his last name was Bailey, I think, but I could be wrong. I'll have to check the box score. He hits a 3. UCLA goes up by 1, and then Gonzaga, coming out of the timeout, they do a dribble handoff just inside of half court, and Julian Strawther comes up and drains a long 3-pointer. And that was by far the highlight of the tournament. And then Gonzaga was able to hold on from there. But an absolutely wild game and a wild finish. But what did you see overall? I mean, how did Gonzaga come back and win this game? Was it more so of a comeback, or do you think UCLA kind of slipped up in some areas?
I mean, listen, I think the one thing that Gonzaga did without question better than UCLA the entire day was the way they played inside the paint, particularly when it came to inside points and also rebounds. Gonzaga had 50 rebounds, UCLA had 26. To be nearly doubled in that area is almost impossible to overcome just because they were just down so bad on the boards in terms I'm talking about UCLA, that is. And Gonzaga, that's such an advantage for them that I'm not surprised that they won. What the one thing I will say is I'm surprised UCLA was able to hang in the game despite being so overmatched on the boards. But that's credit to their star players, particularly Jaime Jaquez. He had a really, really good game, putting up 29. And for UCLA, that's probably it for Jaime Jaquez era at UCLA. I don't think I can see him coming back. I also don't know if he has any eligibility left. So that really sucks for them because that's another member of that Final Four run team who's gone. And then I think Tiger Campbell will still be there. He's a little bit younger, I believe, than Jaime Jaquez is. So he's a great point guard. If when he returns, oh no. Okay, I'm not sure what grade Tiger Campbell is, but I think that he will be back. And the expectation again would be for UCLA to have a very good team again next year. So that does suck on their end. But as for looking at this Gonzaga team, I see a sleeping giant here in the final or the Elite Eight. Realistically, I mean, this is a team that nobody talks about all year. Like all the other years, we hear Gonzaga, 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 Gonzaga. Well, this was the year that we didn't, and now they're in the Elite Eight. And I don't know, they look pretty poised at this point to really make a run.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying going into the tournament. Gonzaga the last few years has been the number one overall seed. They've had so much pressure because they've perennially been a top team, and they almost won a title a few years ago before losing to UNC in the title game. But they've had great teams under Mark Few, and Mark Few is a phenomenal coach. They just haven't been able to win the big one. They haven't won March Madness, but I think finally with a little less attention, and they still have a very solid team. Obviously, having Drew Timme as the anchor is huge, and I think the fact that they've been kind of just focusing on themselves and kind of just handling their own business, I think that goes a long way towards silencing the other distractions off the court. So I think for them to come in and beat UCLA, and a few years ago when they played each other, Gonzaga was supposed to win that game, and they did, but they barely won. I think last night UCLA was probably favored slightly, but for Gonzaga to come in and win that game, especially in the fashion that they did, to come back from that deficit at halftime, a double-digit deficit, that shows a lot. And I think going forward, I mean, like you said, they are this sleeping giant because no one's really paying attention to them. But now I think people are because they're like, hey, okay, they just beat UCLA and they came back and they kind of just took it to them, honestly. They honestly had no answers for Timme and anyone else down low. So credit to Gonzaga. I mean, they're going to have a really tough game tomorrow. They'll have to go up against UConn, who's been kind of another sleeping giant, I could argue, in this tournament. But
absolutely, that will be a great match.
We'll save that recap for Monday as well. I might get into it later, but I believe we're going to have a guest on very shortly.
Yeah, so we're going to have Maddie on in just a moment. And I want to ask you, Jeffrey, of the games that are remaining for today's slate in the Sweet 16, which one are you most excited for? I think for me, it's without a doubt actually the Houston and Miami one, because I actually think Miami is going to have the chance to beat Houston. The Xavier Texas one is also very exciting. And also, too, I just have a soft spot in my heart for Princeton just because I'm from New Jersey.
Right. If you're asking me, the one that jumped off the page for me was the Xavier Texas game. I have definitely given the Miami Houston game more attention just because I do think Miami has a shot, and they've been kind of cruising in the Sweet 16. They pummeled Indiana. That was an impressive win, and I think Houston is a beatable team, but I would say Xavier Texas is probably the showdown I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah, good point. All right, we welcome in Maddie Kane into the show. Maddie, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, thanks for joining the show.
Yes, thanks for coming on.
Of course.
All right, so what do you want to talk about today, Maddie? The floor is yours.
Well, I'm more into NFL than some things, so I was thinking we could talk about how your teams have been doing during free agency, because I know the Broncos have been spending kind of a lot. Like they've been at the top of the charts that I've seen. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the Broncos have been making a lot of moves, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm happy, I'm excited. I feel like we have a team that isn't as far off as some may think, especially with the addition of Sean Payton. Like, I do think that coaching upgrade is going to help a lot. And
Yeah.
honestly, the offensive line is where they're spending the majority of their money. And I think that's the most important place. Because if you look at it, obviously, we're already paying Russell. We already have Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton in the wide receiver department. And honestly, offensive line is kind of the biggest step that we need to take. And Sean Payton values the offensive line. And I think we know that we're going to be running the ball with a lot, especially after the way that Russell played. So I love those moves. I really have yet to see any move that I did not like. And that's kind of the opposite of last season, because I felt like we made some moves that were really questionable, like re-signing Melvin Gordon and bringing in Randy Gregory. Those players just did nothing for us last year. Whereas now I feel like we have guys who I can count on a little bit more. But the one thing that I will say is you are right. We have spent a lot. And I think on some of those players, the Broncos have overspent a little bit. So it's going to be worth seeing in the long run how those players actually pan out. Because if they don't live up to their value, then the team's kind of be in the same situation again, where they're kind of at no choice but to rebuild, because they'll have several bad contracts. And the Russell one does not even start until next year. That's the worst part.
True.
Yeah. So, I mean, what about the Patriots? Because you're a Patriots fan. They've made some interesting kind of moves. I mean, at the same time, like, they're moving Jalen Mills to safety. I think that's interesting. They got to find some way to improve that defense, especially with, there's a constant kind of fluctuating door in the secondary. It's been recently, since Tom Brady left. It's just been a little bit of a revolving door. And the one thing I do like the best about the Patriots, though, is that they're getting a better offensive coordinator. Like, Bill O'Brien, I think, is way, way better than Matt Patricia was. And honestly, like, I know nobody wants to give Mac Jones any credit because last year was obviously a rough year. I could see him improving a lot under Bill O'Brien. I also like the Gesicki pickup too. I think having a strong tight end who could be a threat in the red zone is like a really big benefit. And if you look, when did really Tom Brady really hit his second peak? Once he had Gronk, a great tight end. And that's something you need in your offense. You need to have it. I mean, look at the Eagles. They have Dallas Goedert. Look at the Chiefs. They have Travis Kelce. Those are really the guys who kind of bring the offense to the next level. And that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think we're going to be a lot better under Bill O'Brien. And, like, I'm happy about Juju Smith-Schuster because we needed another wide receiver. But, like, I want us to get either a Jeudy from you or from the Arizona Cardinals, because
DeAndre Hopkins.
I think that we need, like, the top wide receiver. Like, Juju's good, but we need like a WR1, and like I don't really think we have that right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Well, Maddie,
Jacoby went to the Raiders, so we don't have him anymore either.
Well, that might be good because of that stupid play he had.
Maddie, I'm not sure if you saw this. This actually came out earlier this morning. The Patriots said that they were not planning on pursuing a trade for DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not sure if you saw that. I got that from Bleacher Report, but what are your thoughts on that? Because that came out this morning and I was a little surprised. And apparently there's something about the philosophy, and apparently that's what's holding this thing up.
Huh. Yeah, no, I didn't see that. So that kind of sucks, I guess, but
because I feel like that'd be a perfect fit.
Well,
and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, obviously.
Guys, you're missing the big point here. DeAndre Hopkins and Bill O'Brien do not get along. Like, that's probably the biggest issue, right? That's the difference in philosophy.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
He traded him for a bag of chips from Houston because Bill O'Brien was the coach and GM at the time. So he was the one who shipped Hopkins off. I'm sure he has some ill will towards him.
Yeah, that's obviously must be why, because I know him, like Bill likes him, but like Bill Belichick, but obviously if Bill O'Brien doesn't, that's not going to work because he's the offensive coordinator. So
yeah.
Well, then I hope we get Jeudy, honestly, from you, but I don't know if that will happen either.
Well, it doesn't appear like the Broncos are actually going to trade Jeudy, just because KJ Hamler's now hurt. So we're down another receiver already before the season starts. We don't really know what his availability is going to be. And also, too, the one thing is that Jerry Jeudy is the Broncos' best receiver in terms of skill. So I don't think that they're going to give him up for something cheap. I know the rumor has been a second-round pick. I'm going to be honest. the price they said is higher than that, at least on the Broncos end with their reporters. So, I mean, if they're asking for a first, that seems like the only way that I would trade him, especially when you consider just last year, Marquise Brown got traded for a first. So, I mean, that's kind of like the going rate, I feel like, for a receiver. Now, at the same time, there's better receivers on the market. Like maybe Odell, that's probably like the best option right now. But at the same time, too, who's to say that his philosophy or he would fit in your philosophy as well? I feel like the Patriots are a little bit stuck in the middle of the NFL because I feel like they are not bad enough to be one of the worst teams and really improve their offense with a high pick, but they're not close enough to teams like the Chiefs and the Bengals. But I mean, they could beat them in any given game. Like I would never be surprised if the Patriots outbeat anyone. But Maddie, too, think about the other concerns that the Patriots have. Last year, their special teams was horrible.
Bad, yeah, really bad.
I like, and that is something
That's
that
so unlike them too.
Many games.
Yeah, it did lose you guys a lot of games.
And
lost.
the playoff, but for us to get in the playoffs, we lost because of special teams in that one too.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of quite a few games the Patriots had where their special teams did not deliver, and that's very uncharacteristic of a Bill Belichick coach team and just the Patriots in general because you expect good fundamentals. Let me ask you something, Maddie, because you're a Patriots fan. Do you feel like Bill Belichick's kind of like lost it a little bit? Like these last few years, I just don't see the same guy out there.
Yeah, it's hard because, like, yes, but also at our prime, we have to think like the talent he had, like Brady, Gronkowski.
Yeah, the greatest quarterback of all time.
Yeah, like so. Has he lost it? Like probably a little, but he's also lost so much talent. And like, no offense, because I like Mac Jones, I think he's going to be better this season. But between going from Tom Brady to, well, you can forget about Cam Newton to Mac Jones, and then also having a really awful offensive coordinator last,
who he hired though.
year. Exactly, he hired him. Now I don't know why, but it just seems he might be losing some of it. But also, I don't think I can like blame him for everything because people on the team have also just been playing so bad.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's for sure. I don't think you could put all the blame on him because it's unfair to credit him when the team's winning and then just credit and completely discredit him when it's losing because the talent level definitely isn't the same.
Right.
Jeff, let's bring up your Eagles though, because Maddie, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on CJ Gardner-Johnson going to the Lions. I have to be honest with you. I was very surprised because it seemed like he was the one guy all offseason that they were going to try and keep.
I agree. I don't know what Boss thinks, but I was very surprised that the Eagles did not match the $8 million, or at least that's what I heard.
I was shocked too.
It seems like they offered a multi-year deal and he didn't want it. So it's
very confusing.
I don't understand that portion of it either.
And I didn't understand not using the franchise tag either because that's what they said originally. I don't know. The whole process to me was just very strange because it seemed like
I think
they were going to lock him up.
Sorry.
No, you can keep going, Maddie.
Oh, okay. From what I understand, I think is he thought he deserved more money in the long-term contract. So he's like, I want 1 year to like bet on myself, kind of like Lamar did. But then that didn't end up working out because now he's not even with the Eagles anymore. Although I have to say, I think the Lions are going to be good. So that's just my opinion.
do agree with that. I think they're kind of ready to usher in this new era. I mean, we saw it last year. They were definitely sniffing up on a lot of teams.
Yeah, I agree.
But I agree.
They made some good additions on defense, the Lions. So that's really where you want to see
especially in the secondary.
Cam Sutton, and then adding CJ Gardner-Johnson. And they still have 2 first-round picks, too, from the Rams trade. That's another really great aspect that they have. I wonder if they would trade up and maybe try and get like a star receiver, like maybe Jackson Smith, Najaba. I don't know. I could just see them maybe trying to make a move later just to, I don't know. But they also do need a young corner. So it's like, I could see them making a lot of different moves. But their defense is kind of younger. Like there's some guys down there who have potential. Specifically, that safety Joseph who picked off Rodgers. I'm a big fan of him. I think the Lions are definitely going to be good. So I agree with that statement, Matt.
I mean, is it far-fetched to say that they could win the NFC North? Is that a far-fetched?
I mean, at this point, I would expect them to be the favorites. But I'm going to be honest with you. I actually have another team I want to throw at you because I actually think they're getting completely discredited. The Packers. I'm going to be honest. I could see them improving without Aaron Rodgers. I think with Jordan Love, he's still very capable of playing quarterback. You saw what he did against the Eagles, right? Look at what all the good quarterbacks did against the Eagles. Who were the best quarterbacks in the NFL? Mahomes, We saw Dak do a good job against the Eagles defense. Those quarterbacks stepped up. And then look at what Jordan Love did as soon as he came in the game, right?
Yeah.
He came in and he started balling against the Eagles defense. I don't know. I see potential out there, and I would not be surprised.
I think the only thing there is that it's a very small sample size, but I do think he has a chance to definitely compete for the North, no doubt. I mean, there's definitely some good there. But I was going to ask Maddie, because this has definitely been the storyline of the NFL offseason, the whole Aaron Rodgers drama. And now that we know that he wants to play for the Jets, and this actually kind of gets back to what we were talking about the Patriots. It kind of affects the Patriots a little bit just because they're in the same division. I mean, what are your thoughts on the whole situation? Because
the Jets got to worry about beating the Patriots first.
Yeah, we've seen Rodgers say, "Hey, I intend to play for the Jets. I want to play for the Jets." Yeah. Like, how do you feel about Rodgers probably being on the Jets sooner rather than later? Like, how does it make you feel as a Patriots fan?
I mean, to be honest, if he plays like he did last season, I am not worried. Like, and maybe that's just me being naive, but I feel like when I was watching the games, I was not that impressed like a majority of the time with how he was playing. But at the same time, since they signed Allen Lazard, like, he'll have someone he's very familiar with, and I know he sees him in the end zone a lot. So there's kind of two sides to it. Like, if he's like the really good Aaron Rodgers that like I've known, then I'm scared, and I think that will probably be like last in the division. But if he's playing like he did last season, and I think we're building like a pretty good defense, then I'm not really that worried.
I'm going to be honest with you, Maddie. I do think the Patriots have some things going on their side. Number one, the Jets are cursed. So that's a good that's a good place to start. Second, the Jets have to worry about just beating the Patriots. They haven't even beat the Mac Jones and Cam Newton Patriots. They haven't, they're not on that level yet. Second of all, like, before, this has nothing to do with the Patriots, but the Jets O-line needs some work. I mean, let's be honest. It's not like it's the 5-star O-line that the 49ers or the Eagles have, or the Chiefs. They have a long ways to go in that regard. And if Aaron Rodgers at his age is under constant pressure, I mean, it's not going to be that easy. Also, I mean, sure, Allen Lazard coming over, I guess, is nice, but are there better receivers out there than Allen Lazard? Yeah, I think we all would agree that. Now, Garrett Wilson is the person who I think is going to take the most advantage of this, and I could see him and Aaron Rodgers having a great connection. But at the same time, too, the one biggest concern that I always have about the Jets, and I'm going to say this until pretty much the end of time. I'm sorry, that bum calling plays, Nathaniel Hackett. I mean, come on, that guy is a joke. That guy is an absolute joke. Yeah, he's going to be the one who's running the ship there. I mean, I'm sure Aaron's going to be in his ear. I'm sure Aaron's going to be directing him the whole time. But the whole complaint was that Russell did the same thing. So if Aaron's doing the same thing as Russell did, what's to say the success rate will be any better than it was in Denver? I don't know.
Anything like he was when he was your coach, that's not going to go well.
I think the man's just overall a moron, because also he called plays for the Jaguars too. And the Jaguars fans, from what I see, are pretty hypocritical of his performance as well. And people like to say, oh, he did it with Blake Bortles. Well, the rest of the offense looked really good because they also had Leonard Fournette, who at the time was an absolute beast when he first came into the league. So it helped having that with a good O-line. Plus, the Jaguars were spending a lot of money at that time. So it was a team that was kind of built to win. And they also gave a big contract to Blake Bortles. Yes, they moved on. But at the time, they believed in him, and he was their guy. And still, with all that, he still ended up not being there long term and didn't even last. And I don't know. I'm just not a fan of the guy. I think he's really questionable when it comes to some of his decisions. I do not trust him in a decision-making role such as offensive coordinator. I think that, combined with the O-line problems, I still see a lot of the problems that the Broncos had, and I can't help but think, okay, I can see the Jets having some of them too. I mean, realistically, like, there's a lot of talent on the Jets defense, just like there was the Broncos. But that doesn't mean that's going to translate to wins automatically. And also, just because you add a good quarterback, that doesn't mean that either. There's still so much that goes into that. And honestly, too, I'm not the biggest Robert Saleh fan either. I think he's got some holes in his resume that he could point to as well. So there's definitely a lot of concern that I have with the Jets. So no, I don't think you're crazy at all for saying you're really not all that worried about the Jets. I mean, you are a Patriots fan. You've been beating up on them pretty much your whole life. I sure as hell wouldn't be that concerned about them.
Yeah, I'm really not.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like the best approach for you to take as a Patriots fan is just hope that Mac Jones plays a lot better, because when he's balling, it gives your offense a much better chance and makes the team look so much better.
Well,
Yeah,
go
I think
ahead.
he'll be good this year.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think he has a chance to bounce back. And I think adding Juju helps. Obviously, adding Mike Gesicki helps. And I think those
Yeah.
are two guys that you can probably count on more often than not.
And Ramondre too. He's going to be a huge part of the offense,
Yeah,
especially with Damian
Ramondre Stevens is definitely a slept-on weapon in that offense. But I wanted to ask you my final question before we wrap this up in a couple minutes, just because of timing. I know that, Maddie, the AFC East is definitely a very tough division. And I know we were just talking about the hypothetical situation that Aaron Rodgers does join the Jets. So you're looking at them. I mean, they're probably going to be pretty formidable just because they did have like pretty decent success last year. I know they collapsed down the stretch, but you saw probably a lot of good that you haven't seen in a while from them. You have the Patriots, who are kind of this middle of the road team where they could definitely be a wild card contender. But then you have the two other teams in the division. You've seen the Bills be a perennial playoff team, a Super Bowl contender the last couple of years. And I know that they didn't really live up to the Super Bowl hype last year, but they still have a great team, especially offensively. I mean, they're loaded on offense with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs and company. And then the Dolphins, they're a team that's very interesting. If health goes their way with Tua, I mean, they have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and then they added Jalen Ramsey on defense. So they're definitely going to be the next. I mean, where do you think the Patriots stack up among the rest of the division?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking the Jets will probably be in last.
Okay.
I
like
think that depending on the way, like it really is up in the air, because I think depending on the way Mac Jones plays, we do have I think we have a very slim, I guess, but a possibility of at least beating the Bills once. I mean, we almost beat them this year with our horrible offense. And also, I think that the Dolphins, although I do like their team when Tua's healthy, if he's not healthy, they're quite easily beatable, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a big step off from without Tua. But I mean,
Yeah.
if he's there and when Tua plays, I actually think the Dolphins are the best team in that division. Call me crazy, but I really do think that.
I think Tua does make them like the best one. Between Waddle and then Tyreek Hill, I mean,
Yeah,
with
no,
Tua throwing to them, it's really good.
absolutely. And the point is that division is just going to be absolutely loaded this year. I mean, it's going to be tough for pretty much all four of those teams, and I really look forward to the next NFL season. Maddie, last thing, anything you want to say before you go out?
Yeah, I actually did just want to ask Boz one thing. How do you feel about losing Miles Sanders and then getting Penny? Do you think it's an upgrade or?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think if you're looking at just last year and how they both played, I think it's probably a slight downgrade. But
Yeah.
Penny's not terrible. And welcome back to WLOI, Loyola Radio, streaming online at WLOI.org and Campus TV channel 111.1. You're listening to After the Whistle with Jeffrey Bozzi and Jimmy Cody. We just heard from Maddie Kane about some NFL news and some hot topics there. But now we're going to shift our focus back to March Madness, and we have a very special guest on, and that is Tyler Demers. Tyler, welcome to the show. How is it going?
Doing good. How are we doing, guys?
Good,
We're
good.
doing good.
Great weekend of basketball so far, and we got a lot of really interesting games tonight, Tyler. Let's start off with that Alabama-San Diego State game.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts in that one?
Yeah. So, I mean, Alabama, clearly the best team in the country. They've been the best team in the country for a while. Brandon Miller, what can you say about him? Top 5 pick. Alabama's an absolute wagon. They're kind of a weird makeup of a team. I mean, they have 2 freshmen. I think Mark Sears is a freshman, and then Brandon Miller, who are kind of leading the team, along with some few other veterans. It's not your like traditional number 1 overall seed in the tournament, but they've just found ways to win all year. And I think San Diego State can keep it close. They have one of the best defenses in the country, but so does Alabama. I'm probably going to end up taking Alabama now, but I'm more intrigued in the second game, Houston-Miami. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I said it before. I actually really like Miami tonight. I can see them winning. The way that they played the other day, I thought they looked really good against Indiana. I thought there was going to be a tight game, and in all honesty, they really kind of pulled away from Indiana, and they
Yeah.
looked good. Especially Wong. He looked like really impressive. I mean, he just keeps getting better and better over his time at Loyola, or not Loyola, at Miami. Mix that up. But point is he's getting better and he's playing better in the tournament. And as a team, I feel like Miami's playing a little bit better right now than they were throughout like maybe the ACC tournament and like the later part of the regular season. And not that I think Houston's bad. I just think Miami's kind of hitting their stride right now and can make it a tough game. Like I respect Houston whole like 100%. They got a
Yeah.
great squad, like especially with Sasser back. Listen, they're fully loaded. They're there. They got a lot of potential, and they've been there before. They've been to Final Fours in the past. They've been successful in the tournament. So I'm not surprised if either team wins. But with the way that Miami's playing, I certainly think they have a very good chance to give Houston a game. Jeff, I don't know your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I definitely would give Miami a good shot. And we know that they can score. They hung 85 on Indiana, so they can definitely keep up with a lot of teams. And I think it should be no different with Houston. I know Houston's a very complete team and they've won a lot of games this year, but I think Miami definitely has that upset potential where if they're hitting their shots, I mean, it's just going to be hard for other teams to keep up. And I think Houston could keep up, but I do think there's a great upset potential in that game tonight.
Tyler, how about you?
Yeah, this is the game of guard play. I mean, Miami, just like last year, they have five guys that could take you off the dribble on the perimeter. I mean, obviously the 4 out, 1 in with Omer in the middle, who is back from injury, which is something that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. He is the key. I think he's the key player in this game, outside of obviously the Marcus Sasser Isaiah Wong matchup. But if Omer can hold his own in the paint, Miami's going to keep this close. And say whoever wins the rebound battle is probably going to win this game. Houston's one of the best rebounding teams in the country, but if Miami can keep them off the boards, I think they can pull it out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. Like this Miami team, that injury is something that's not like that injury comeback is definitely something not getting talked about. This was a team that coming into the tournament, it was a little bit of a different team than it is now. They're playing with some more confidence. They're getting guys back. I think we're all on the same page here that this has upset potential, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to add on the Houston Miami game?
I mean, I guess either matchup, like we'll talk about it later, obviously the Xavier Texas game, but either the matchups between the four teams, it's going to be a great Elite Eight game. Just the guard play in that region is incredible.
I agree 100%. And before we get to the Xavier Texas game, because I know that's definitely going to be a showdown later tonight, we have the Princeton Creighton game that's,
Yeah.
I think, been the lesser talked about game of the four tonight. And coming in, we all know about Princeton. They've shocked the world. They beat Arizona in the first round, and then they followed that up with a very impressive win in the second round over Missouri. And they've kind of just been riding this hot streak. And you saw the difference in the two games for Princeton. They had some trouble scoring in that Arizona game, but they really did it with their defense. And then in the second round against Missouri, their offense came alive and they put up 78. So I think tonight it's a very interesting matchup for them to go against Creighton because Creighton's a 6 seed is a pretty solid team and they took care of business against NC State. And then they had a pretty impressive win against Baylor. And Baylor has obviously been a battle tested team over the years, winning it in 2021 and kind of having a good team this year with a lot of good guard play. But they came in and beat them pretty easily. So what are you looking for in this game tonight?
Yeah, I mean, Princeton is just built on defense. At least what I've seen. I'm gonna be like honest. I think a lot of people haven't watched a lot of Princeton games, me included. But at least the first 2 games that I watched, they're built around their defense. Just kind of like a grinded out style, and I think that could give Creighton some trouble. But I don't know. It's a nice story, Princeton. I can't see them going any farther than this round. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think for Princeton, I think it's obviously gonna have to be a team effort. But the thing for Creighton that kind of concerns me is their bench is awful. They've had terrible bench play in this tournament. I think in the first game, they only had 2 bench points and it was from one guy. And then in the last game, and quote me if I'm wrong, but I think they only had 9 bench points. It was all from the same guy too. So I think if one or two of their starters gets in foul trouble early on, I mean, that could be trouble. If you could go deeper in the bench and kind of play guys that are not really accustomed to playing too many minutes, that could be trouble for Creighton.
Yeah, that's a common theme with college basketball teams, especially nowadays. I mean, the starting five is so strong compared to the bench that if you get into foul trouble, I mean, the rest of the game is going to be tough. You saw it with Kansas against Arkansas. Kevin McCullough got into foul trouble, and they were laboring for the rest of the game because of that. And I think that's something that can have to carry in this game.
Right. And then for Princeton, I think history is definitely on their side. I mean, we've seen a 15 seed from New Jersey get to the Elite Eight in the last year in St. Peter. So Princeton definitely has a shot at repeating that history tonight. So I think it's going to be a very back and forth game. Creighton is obviously favored pretty heavily, but don't count out the Princeton Tigers.
Definitely don't count them out. Honestly, I love when the Ivy League teams go on runs. I don't know why. I just love it for some reason. It's what makes the tournament so great. But you know what else makes it great? The firepower matchups like what we have in Texas Xavier matchup tonight. So Tyler, give me your thoughts on that one, because that one should be an absolute dandy.
This is going to be a great game. This is going to be the best game of the night. No doubt in my mind. Let's just start with Texas. I mean, Marcus Carr, I think it's like about his 6th year in college. He's been in college basketball for so long. He's a great scorer. Sir'Jabari Rice coming off the bench, 6th man. He's one of the best shooters in college basketball. Texas has so much firepower on offense, and their bigs are just incredibly athletic. Christian Bishop, Dylan Dessou, 2 great bigs, throw up lobs. Their defense is incredible. They're an all-around team. There's not a weak spot I can see with Texas. Obviously, they had like the rough patch in the middle of the year with the change in coach, but they've bounced back. They're in the Big 12, which is the best conference in college basketball. And then on Xavier's side, I mean, Jack Nungy has played like an All-American this tournament. He had a great block against, was it Kennesaw State to kind of seal the game in the first round? Great game. And then you got Soli Boom at point guard, who he's had a kind of a rough tournament, but I mean, they've had consistent like guys pick them up all year, like throughout the tournament. And it's another thing with them. It's kind of like Creighton. Their bench isn't great, but I think guys have just picked them up all year. Like Jerome Hunter, this tournament has been incredible. He's come off the bench and he's been a spark for them.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out between these two teams, and you kind of hit on a lot of them, but they both have a lot of weapons on offense. I mean, you look at Xavier, they have Sule Boom, who's the lead guy, and he, like you said, kind of had a rough game in the second round, very inefficient from the field, but got to the line pretty good amount and made free throws, and he's a very good guy at penetrating just because of his speed. And then you look at Jack Nungy down low, he's going to be a force, and it's going to be interesting to see how he fares against the likes of Timmy Allen and others, because that's definitely going to determine the game. And then you look at guys like Adam Kunkel, who can knock down shots on the outside. I think that could go a long way. And I think for Xavier, they're going to have to counter Texas, because Texas is more likely than not going to make a lot of shots on the outside. And Marcus Carr and Sir'Jabari Rice, they can both light it up. They did have kind of off games in the second round, but I would definitely expect them to bounce back. So I do think this could be a lot of firepower tonight.
Yeah, and the one thing about Xavier is they've been missing Zach Fremantle for a lot of the second half of the season, and I think it's going to catch up to them in this game. I mean, they're obviously you have Nungy in the middle, but Fremantle's their other forward, and they're lacking size. And if you look at Texas's team, I mean, they, like I said, their big guys are so athletic, and I just think that athleticism up front is going to be the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think Texas is the stronger team, if you want me to be honest with you, just based on what I've seen here throughout the regular season and in the way they've played in the tournament too. Tyler, you're right. You cannot underestimate what they do. They're like a different kind of brand of basketball too, Texas, compared to like what we expect from basketball now. They don't really shoot as many threes as a lot of other teams. They look to work the ball inside. They like drive a lot, which that's their main focus, but they also get the ball inside a lot too. They're really strong on the glass. Like they do a lot of the little things right. And that's kind of, I feel like, the advantage they have over this Xavier team, who, when their stars really aren't playing great, they're kind of a team that can be up and down. I mean, we saw that in the Kennesaw State game, right?
Yeah. I mean, Kennesaw State arguably should have won that game. Yeah. I mean, and then on Texas side, just one thing to mention. I guess like the big guys again, Timmy Allen, he's a great scorer. They can change the composition of like how they play based on their opponent, and that's not a thing that a lot of college basketball teams can do.
Yeah, that's an advantage they have because they're so skilled down there, and they're such a deep team too. Like you were saying earlier, that's what gives them this opportunity to kind of switch who they are based on matchups, and it's a matchups type tournament, right? Like you're only going to win by exploiting the matchups that you can. And with a team like Texas, who's able to kind of interchange some things, that's the advantage they have. And honestly, I think it's an advantage they definitely have tonight. And I'm going to be honest, I like Texas a lot in this game.
I'm taking Texas.
I could see them covering too.
What was it, 4.5? It's a lot of points.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, with the way that they play. If Xavier's leaving a little bit off their game, if they play like how they did against Kennesaw State, you really think they got a great chance against Texas? I don't know.
Good point. I can't see Xavier really running away with this game. Texas is gonna be in it.
Yeah, that's the thing too. I feel like Texas predominantly is kind of going to control this game too. They're going to be able to kind of play it the way that they want.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that you wanted to bring up some NFL news, but I just wanted to ask you real quick before we get into that. Obviously, last night kind of had some wild games, but looking forward to the two Elite Eight matchups that we'll be having tomorrow. I mean, are there any storylines that jump off right off the bat? Because we have FAU and Kansas State, and FAU's kind of been sneaking along in the Elite Eight, and Kansas State's had some dramatic wins. And then you look at UConn and Gonzaga. We've talked about that matchup for a few days now, and now that we're getting it, I mean, you've argued multiple times that UConn could win the whole thing, and you've talked a lot of praise about Gonzaga. So is there anything really quick that you want to talk about in those two matchups?
I mean, the Florida Atlantic Kansas State game, I don't want to say a traditional March Madness game, but like Kansas State, such a good story. You know, Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel, just incredible backcourt. And then Florida Atlantic is like your prototypical Cinderella. I can see either team's winning this game. I'm going to take Kansas State. I just think Marquise Noel is leaps and bounds ahead of every other point guard in the country when in terms of running the offense. You saw it yesterday when he twisted his ankle. He was off the floor. Michigan State went on a huge run. And
You think he's better than Tiger Campbell? I don't know about that. Tiger wasn't the reason they lost yesterday. He only had one turnover, and he had none the game before.
It's tough.
They're close. I mean,
right now, yes, though. I would say he's better right now. I mean, he's really put them on the back. I mean,
I guess so. But Tiger's been doing this for 3 years, so
Right.
I guess maybe it's the new shiny thing over Mr.
a
Consistent.
little bit of recency bias in there.
I think maybe, but also 19 assists is not something to ignore. But also at the same time, Tiger Campbell went on a run leading a team when he was a freshman. So I don't know. I feel like he's been there, done that for a little bit longer than Marquise Noel has. So I would give my man Tiger the advantage in that. But definitely, I would agree with you. He's been an absolute star in this tournament. And it is kind of feel like a typical kind of March Madness matchup where you kind of have the nice story going up against the Cinderella. And by the way, FAU, this is the farthest they've ever been in any sort of tournament. I'm pretty sure I know for a fact in basketball because my uncle went there. So I know that they don't have much athletic success in their career. I think the only like decent sport that they really have there is like baseball. Their baseball team's pretty good. But I mean, football, they had Lane Kiffin for a couple of years. So I guess that was the previous most noteworthy thing to happen for them. But at this point, I mean, this is awesome for them. I mean, they're now in the Elite Eight. And this, Tyler, this is the thing that we were saying on the show earlier. This is a team that has been ranked all year. Like they kind of got a little bit disrespected where they were seated.
Being in that mid-major conference kind of it doesn't help them in the public's eyes, but when you're taking these games in the tournament, some mid-major conferences are better than the others. They've won their conference, and you look at the teams that they lost to.
UAB was in that conference too, and they're a very strong mid-major team.
UAB was a great team. I mean, and they were ranked. You're not ranked for no reason. Like the AP poll is very telling of if a team is good or not. If you're ranked, you're a good team, no matter what conference you're in.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I give FAU a big chance in this game. I know that Kansas State's playing well. They're a nice story. They've certainly got the guys, but FAU, the one thing I notice, they just adapt to whatever the game is in front of them. Like their first game, I mean, all these games have been grinded out kind of games for them, right? Like they have not had a single easy moment in this tournament. Think about it. They had a really tough matchup against Memphis. They had a really, I mean, that FDU team kind of snuck up on them. And really that second half, I mean, FDU played a lot better than they did at the first half. So it was such a like grinded out game in the end. And then we saw their win over Tennessee. They didn't really look that great on offense. They went up against a really good defensive team, and yet they still kind of find a way to win. And that's something that I got to give them some credit for, because no matter what the circumstances are, they find a way to adapt and overcome. And at the end of the day, Kansas State is kind of the same thing. So I'm very excited for this matchup. And honestly, it's kind of the matchup that I'm most excited for. Just because of the storylines that come with it. Yes, I know Gonzaga UConn has the fireworks, but this is to be expected. Whereas this other one, and I'll say this too, I feel like Kansas State, if you look, like, think about it, they were underdogs to Kentucky, right? Like, they've just been getting doubted, kind of like FAU has throughout the entire tournament. People are just expecting them to lose. Oh, this is the game they get upset. This is the game. You know what I mean? And now both these teams are in the spot where one of them's going to the Final Four.
Also, initially, Michigan State was favored over Kansas State last night before that line flipped. So
Okay, so I did not even know
there's
that.
another
So
one.
that is,
two
yeah,
games in a row.
2 games in a row they've been
Where they're playing
disrespected.
6 and 7 seeds.
Yeah.
It's very telling. But Tyler, really quickly before we get into the NFL talk, we have the UConn Gonzaga game also tomorrow, and I think one of the top storylines there is going to be the matchup down low between Drew Timme and Adama Sanogo. What are you looking for there, and who do you think has the advantage? Because they're both very formidable centers.
I can't give either team an advantage in this game, honestly. UConn, they're so athletic on the outside. The 2 scorers, Newton, Jordan Hawkins, incredible scorers. Gonzaga doesn't have the most over the defense in the country, but their offense is obviously the best in the country. So it balances out. And that matchup down low, you said it, Drew Timme and Adama Sanogo. And I want to mention Donovan, I forget how to say his last name. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but Klingahan, I believe his name is. He's a freshman, 7-footer who had an incredible game yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. That matchup is going to decide who wins the game. If Timme has another performance like he did last night, Gonzaga might pull it out. But UConn has looked like the best team in the country during the tournament. They've just been destroying everyone that they've played.
You could argue this is probably the best team that they have played.
Yes.
And with Gonzaga, you could make the case they're a little bit more battle tested just because they just came off that UCLA game. But at the same time, they might be hurting coming out of that game where UConn was able to kind of coast because they won by 23, right? So I think it's fair to ask how rusty, not rusty, but how much of an advantage is it going to be for UConn, because they're already similar in styles. They hold the advantage in terms of their defense as well. So I don't know. I actually think that UConn wins this game. I'm going to be honest with you.
Agree with you there. I do think UConn ends up winning. I picked Gonzaga in my bracket, but UConn has just looked so much better right now. And we've seen both of these in the tournament before. UConn, who's had the quote easy path to the Elite Eight, and then Gonzaga, who's had the battle tested with UCLA, and then they played in the second round, but obviously battle tested. And then you see UConn might come out flat, maybe, and then Gonzaga might show up in the first half. But you've seen both teams in those scenarios advance. But yeah, you said I'm gonna take UConn in this game. They just look like the better team right now, and Gonzaga arguably should have lost that game last night, but
it's possible to say that, but I still think at the end of the day, you do got to give them credit for grinding it out, because they were the much better team on the boards. I mean, they nearly doubled the amount of rebounds that UCLA had. So I'm not surprised that Gonzaga ended up pulling out that game. And they also had a really good comeback too, that they staged in that middle part of the second half. And that was really able to propel them. All right. So let's hit on some NFL really quick, because we got a few minutes left here. So let's hear your Giants points. I'm sure you got a lot you want to say. Floor is yours.
surprisingly not too much. I mean, there's just a couple signs. Have you guys talked about the Darren Waller trade? I assume you have.
We have. We actually had some Giants fans on that day, and I think we agreed it's a good move, right, Jeff? I mean, it's adding by far the best receiver that Daniel Jones has had.
Formidable weapon over the middle.
Yeah, it's a good weapon over the middle, and
on the outside too. I mean, he can kind of play wherever.
Yeah, he can play whatever. And the real advantage that you have with Darren Waller is that he has speed that other tight ends do not have. So he is not only like that height of a receiver, but he really has the athleticism. I mean, at his prime, he's been bagged up like the last 2 seasons, but really at his best, I mean, this is a guy who's a top 5, top 6 tight end in the NFL. And honestly, I think on his best days, if he's having a really great season, I could see him being maybe top 4. I'm really excited to see how Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka use him, because I think that they've elevated a lot of other players. And I think they have the chance to elevate him as well.
Yeah, he's an absolute matchup nightmare. Daniel Jones has never had a receiver that you would say is a matchup nightmare. I guess the closest guy would be, I guess, maybe like Darius Slayton on the outside.
There's nobody who compares. That's the point.
This is the first
Hodgins,
time that can win one-on-one. It's going to, yeah, you said Dable and Calf's going to use him in ways that maybe you don't see a tight end be used traditionally. Like I think he'll be used a lot as a pure receiver on the outside.
kind of like Kelsey.
Yes.
And that's the hope. And honestly, the thing becomes for Daniel Jones, because I think ultimately the offense, it's a question about Daniel Jones, right? Like, I think that the Giants offense realistically only goes as far as Daniel Jones is going to take them, because you expect Saquon to put up his numbers. You expect him to do what he does. Like, that's expected. But it's like, how far can Daniel Jones's ceiling be, right? Can he become a 30 touchdown guy? I don't know. I think it's a question, but you're also giving him 40 million. So it kind of seems like you've already decided that he needs to be that guy. So from Daniel Jones, with this weapon, and obviously they added Paris Campbell, I would assume they're going to look to add another receiver too. I mean, it doesn't have to be somebody big, but maybe somebody in the draft, right? Like, there's going to be options there. If I was the Giants, I would definitely be looking for a receiver in the draft. The only problem that I have with the Giants is just that they got some holes on that defense, and the O-line needs a little work as too, right? I mean, obviously you want to see a better year 2 out of Evan Neal, because that was Shane's first draft pick. So you can't tell me that's how you want to start off the regime. Yes, things looked really good after year 1, but they need to draft a strong player to actually contribute to the team this year. And they also kind of need to patch up some holes in other areas that ultimately are going to be the difference between them competing with the likes of the Eagles and the Cowboys and staying as a borderline wild card team, because that's who you're chasing, right? The Eagles and the Cowboys are so much ahead of the Giants. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah, definitely the Eagles. I think the Cowboys are definitely ahead of Giants in terms of talent. But coaching wise, I would definitely give the Giants the edge in that one. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, sure, but I don't know. I still think they're a better team. I think their defense absolutely especially their D line against your O line. It's barbecue chicken. It's easy pickings. I mean, Micah Parsons going up against Evan Neal is a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely better. And on Evan Neal, he had a very similar rookie year to our left tackle, Andrew Thomas.
Yeah, Andrew Thomas is phenomenal, but I don't know if you can just count on Evan Neal becoming Andrew Thomas. I think that's a very bold assumption.
No. It was rookie year. I mean, he's going to improve. I can't see a regression coming from him. He was so highly talented out of college that
it can't be worse. He can't be worse.
No.
But you are also, too, it is worth noting that a lot of tackles do struggle when they first come into the NFL and get better over time. That's kind of the way the position is. Laramie Tunsil, right, ended up getting traded, and now he's probably one of the best O linemen in the NFL. I would say
the highest paid.
He's the highest paid. I mean, you could say maybe Trent Williams is better than him, and I actually would say Andrew Thomas is probably better than him too. But I mean, this was a guy who got traded, right? So the Dolphins are a team who definitely could have used Laramie Tunsil. Look at what they're working with now. Their quarterback's doing judo classes to work on getting hit, because it's just such a known fact that he's going to be taking some pressure. So looking back on it, I do think there's reason for optimism, but to say he's going to be Andrew Thomas, I think is definitely a stretch. I mean, Andrew Thomas is really good at what he does and has improved significantly, but you just hope for like him to be an average, at least just look decent from where he was last year in terms of Evan Neal. But I got to ask you too about the defense, because I mean, against the Eagles receivers, you looked really overmatched. Jeff, I mean, AJ Brown had kind of a field day versus the Giants this year. Just seemed like him and Devontae Smith were just essentially able to do whatever they wanted. So, yeah. Tyler, from your perspective, how can you improve the secondary? Because you're kind of locked in with Adoree', you got McKinney, and then what do you kind of do from there?
What do we do from there? That's the question. I mean, the corners last year, it was next man up, and then the next man up just didn't perform.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring this up. We signed somebody from Detroit, Amani Oruwariye, who I believe to be a very good cornerback. when Jeff Okuda had his injury concerns, like had his injuries the last few years, Oruwari stepped up, and he's had a lot of interceptions. He's been great in coverage. Penn State product. He's definitely going to help. He's not the answer, obviously. I don't think Adoree Jackson is the answer either. It's definitely a position we're going to have to address in the draft, along with receiver. And something that Shane said, one thing,
Go.
press conference, he wants to build from the inside out. Obviously, you draft Thibodeau, you draft Neal, and now we got to work on the outside.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could still work on the inside even more because the O-line's not perfect. No. Right, you could hammer those home even more, and honestly, too, if you're paying Daniel Jones, you may as well build up the O-line because
you need protection.
You need protection, absolutely.
And I know that he can run a little bit, but I think protecting, especially his blind side, too, is especially important.
But having protection only allows him to run more, right?
Right, and I think they could design more plays for him to run. I mean, he's very effective when he runs. He's kind of an underrated running quarterback. I feel like you don't really talk about him with Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, but Daniel Jones can really run the ball.
No, he can, and he is pretty solid at it too. I would say it's honestly been like the saving grace for him over the last year. It's just it seems like Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka were like, "Hey, dude, you're athletic, run." Like, here's the thing too. Like we see that with other guys, like who aren't even as fast as Daniel Jones is. We see that with Patrick Mahomes, right? Like he'll even take off.
I would say Justin Herbert's another one. We've seen him run a decent amount.
Another guy too who started doing it, who's you could actually compare their kind of rises this year because they both took a big step up. I mean, this guy is better than Daniel Jones, but Trevor Lawrence started running a little bit this year too. They ran a lot of decent read options with him, and they actually did a pretty good job in their running attack with him and ETN. Again, credit goes to coaching on that. And I think with your addition from Detroit that you mentioned too, it honestly depends on how he fits in the system, right? Because there's a hope based on what he did previously, but with a new coach and obviously with Wink Martindale, you guys are going to play a lot of man. And it's going to be tough, especially when you don't really have top tier corners. So it's kind of just the risk that you run. But at the same time, I thought you guys did a pretty decent job of stopping the run last year. And it's like, against the Cowboys and the Eagles, though, who are your biggest competition because you play them 4 times, it's going to be really rough going up against CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown, where maybe it's a corner, and Devontae Smith, where maybe it's a corner who's just not as nearly as good as those guys.
Yeah, and talking about the run defense, Dexter Lawrence, arguably the best defensive tackle in the league. Obviously, probably not, but you can make a case for him, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, he's deservingly so, like, is in the conversation. He was an all-pro, or he's second team all-pro last year.
Yeah, we need to pay him a lot of money. He needs to be the center of the defense. Well, obviously he's the nose tackle, so obviously he's the center of the defense, but he needs to be the focal point of our defense, and then kind of build around him with like the edge rushers and stuff like that. Like again, from the inside out.
And we saw that with Thibodeau too last year. Like I would say that he kind of is like the opposite of Dexter Lawrence, just because he's a little bit better, obviously, rushing the passer. And I think he gives you guys a huge advantage there. I mean, there was a couple of games later in the season that Kayvon Thibodeau really, really stepped up in. And I see the potential there. Like, the potential is certainly there. Like, he could be a guy that I kind of expect double-digit sacks from, like, throughout his career.
Yeah. He had a rough patch early in the season.
He was also coming off an injury, too, early in the season.
Injury, yeah. And then, but that Washington Commanders game,
yes,
that was the most dominant first half I've seen from the defensive end, rookie defensive end I've ever seen.
No, you know what he has too? He's not as much as like a strength guy. He's more of like a speed guy. Like he kind of reminds me a lot, and this is like not really a good comparison, but I'm just comparing their like speed and their agility and the way that they're able to use their speed to get past the tackles. Von Miller, honestly, he just reminds me of him, and just in that, right? Like I that's just a player that I kind of see with the comparisons. Like there's a lot of other guys who are more like power, like Max Crosby, but the speed that Thibodeau has ultimately is what makes him the best pass rusher, and I can see a lot of potential there. So I definitely agree with you, Tyler. Like that rookie performance that he had last year, I saw it as well, and I definitely took note of it.
A lot of potential around the Giants.
Oh yes,
yeah, and ultimately, I think the biggest question is that those D corners, the O-line, and then Mr. Jones.
And then the quarterback.
Yep. ultimately, if those three things over succeed, then probably the Giants will over succeed on their expectations. If they all under succeed, then more than likely it's not going to be a great season, right? All right.
Good base, and we go from there.
Got to keep growing.
Yeah, you got to
Yep.
keep growing. All right, Tyler. Thank you as always for coming on. I mean, we had a pleasure to have you. I would love to have you on again before the draft because I love talking Giants with you.
Definitely.
All right. Anything else to add?
Nothing for me.
All right. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, Tyler.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right, I think that's gonna do it here on After the Whistle. We'll be back on Monday. We'll definitely be previewing the Final Four because we'll have the Final Four by then, believe it or not. But we also be talking some other sports as well. MLB opening day is next Thursday, so that's definitely in our eyes. So we'll definitely be keeping track of that. But thank you as always for listening, and we will be back on Monday.